When I think back on it now, it feels surreal. But at the time, it was one of the hardest periods of my life. My husband, John, and I are both in our We've been together for 8 years, and we've gone through a lot of big life stressors together. Moves, job changes, family issues. It hasn't always been easy, and honestly, some of those things strained our marriage pretty badly. For the past 2 years, we've been working really hard in marriage counseling, rebuilding and reconnecting. It wasn't perfect, but I thought we were on the right track. And then, right when I was at my most vulnerable, something happened that shook me in a way I didn't expect. I was 8 months pregnant with our first child. I was exhausted. Physically, emotionally. I was still working full-time as the primary earner while also preparing for the baby. Most days, I felt like I was dragging myself through mud. And I've never been the jealous type. Honestly, I've always prided myself on being pretty rational, independent, and not very emotional. But suddenly, I was jealous. Very jealous. Because John had made a new friend, a woman named Pam. Pam is in her mid-20s, younger than us, bubbly and spontaneous. She's into the same hobbies as John. She has the kind of look I know he finds attractive, and she's in an open relationship. In other words, she was basically my opposite. I still remember the first day he came home and told me about her. His face lit up when he said she was so cool, and that she'd invited him to a hobby event she hosts with her partner. At first, I didn't think much of it. John has always been social, and I've never worried about him having friends. But it didn't stop there. For the next year, every other weekend, he was at Pam's event. And then, a few months later, he wanted me to get to know her too. So Pam and her partner started coming to our house on the in-between weekends. Which meant, for over a year, John was seeing Pam and her partner every single weekend. At first, I tried to be understanding. I told myself this was just part of our social circle now. But little things started to eat at me. Pam always sat next to John. They said love you to each other casually, even in front of everyone. John remembered little details about her and would buy her thoughtful gifts. And if, for some reason, a weekend gathering got canceled, John would be noticeably sad, almost sulking. Meanwhile, our date nights had disappeared. Our time together was always rushed. And if I had plans, we just split up instead of carving out time for each other. I started to feel like this relationship was being prioritized over our marriage. And at 8 months pregnant, swollen, hormonal, exhausted, and doing the bulk of the prep for our baby, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being left behind. I told him how I felt. Through tears, I told him it was weird, that I hated it, that I needed more from him. He brushed it off as hormones. He said I was being oversensitive and that I needed to work on my insecurities in individual therapy. He told me Pam and her group were his chosen family, especially since he'd moved away from his own family for me. He said it wasn't fair for me to change the rules now, since I had let him spend all this time with them before. That was a breaking point for me. We talked about it in counseling, but we just dug ourselves deeper. He insisted that if he spent more time with me, something else had to give. Either chores wouldn't get done, or I'd have to adjust my work schedule. He made me feel like I was the problem for wanting more of him. I felt hopeless. And I'll be honest, I even thought about calling his dad, who I'm very close with, just to get someone else involved. That's how desperate I felt. But then one night, after a lot of crying and journaling, I realized something. I couldn't keep hoping our counselor would fix this for us. I had to stand up for myself, for what I needed, for our baby. So, before John left town to be a groomsman in a wedding, I sat him down and told him plainly. He had a week to decide. He could either decide that he wanted to stay married and be a family with me, and if so, he needed to come up with changes. Real ones. Not just vague promises. I needed to know how he was going to be a better husband and father. Or, if he wasn't willing to do that, then when he got back, we'd start planning a separation and figure out. It was terrifying to lay it all out like that. I'd always been more passive, more willing to compromise, but this time, I had to stand firm. And surprisingly, he listened. At the wedding, he said he had a lot of time to reflect. His friend and his bride were so in love, and it made him think about us, about how far we'd drifted, and about what he wanted. When he came home, he told me he chose us. And then he laid out real changes. He would take a complete break from Pam and that whole circle. He'd still play his games online, but no more weekly gatherings. He'd take over the rest of the baby prep, the nursery, the logistics. He promised to create a real postpartum care plan for me and the baby. And this time, he stuck to it. When our son was born, John was over the moon. He fell in love with our little boy instantly. He was there for every feeding, every diaper, every sleepless night. He and our son became inseparable. He leaned into fatherhood in a way that made me proud. And Pam, well, she faded away pretty quickly. She wasn't interested in kids, and her own relationships started to fall apart. In the end, she cheated on her partners, and that whole dynamic collapsed. John actually became closer friends with Kevin, her partner, and that was that. Looking back, I think a lot of my jealousy wasn't just about Pam. It was about me, too. I hated Pam because she represented everything I wasn't and everything I didn't want to be. And apparently, she didn't like me much either. She thought I was a controlling, stuck-up workaholic who didn't appreciate John. Maybe in some ways, she wasn't completely wrong. But what mattered most was that John chose me. He chose our family, and over time, we rebuilt again. 2.5 years later, we're in such a better place. Our son is a wild, wonderful toddler. My career has taken off, and John has found so much purpose in being a dad. We still have our struggles, work stress, toddler chaos. But most mornings, we wake up, snuggle in bed with our son and our dog, and play pretend games. We live a pretty, normal, suburban life. And honestly, I wouldn't trade it for anything, because in the end, the biggest lesson I learned is this. You have to stand up for what you need. For yourself. For your family. Boundaries aren't ultimatums when they come from a place of love and self-respect, and sometimes giving someone the space to choose is what allows them to choose you.